What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about firearms in restrictive states. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Alright, so what do you do if you're in one of these states? Well, the first thing I can say is move. And I'm not just saying that, I've actually done that before. But let's say that's not what you're going to do right now, for whatever reason. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to speak in generalities of things that are commonly legal in a lot of these states. Whether it's in fact legal in your jurisdiction That is up to you to research and find out. It was hard enough for me to keep up with all the laws when I was a police officer in a jurisdiction enforcing those laws, let alone all the different jurisdictions for all the different restrictions. Anyway, with that said, what are some ways, though you may be gunfighting with one hand tied behind your back, at least don't get caught with your pants down. So if you live in one of these states, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, California. After all, California, I believe, is the most populous state in the nation. And there are some really beautiful parts of California. Anywhere north of, say, Whiskey Town, up to Crescent City. That whole area, that north, I say North California, I don't mean like North San Francisco. I mean way, way north of that. Even that chunk is far bigger than a lot of eastern states are. What if you live in one of those areas? You have to do the best you can with what's legal in your area. Well, let's start with handguns. Now, the obvious thing to this is, same handguns that are good and are good recommendations are still going to be good handguns. Now, it kind of hurts me to say that a Glock 19, Glock 17 is a good handgun. But let's roll with it. It is the most common, most ubiquitous, general issued police officer's handgun. So just get one of those with a 10-round magazine if that's the restriction. Easy choice. A lot of people would say, why not move down to a Glock 26? It was actually one of my go-to defensive guns when I'm going small. I usually carry a full-size pistol, but some might say, well, if I can only have a 10-round gun, the Glock 26 is a 10-round gun, why not just have the Glock 26? Well, for the primary reason that I carry a full-size gun, shootability. I only generally carry the Glock 26 on days when it's not feasible or not practical or less practical to carry my go-to defensive guns. If you compare, apples to smaller apples, Glock 17 is a better fighting handgun than a Glock 26. The trade-off. Although you're still restricted to 10 rounds, for most people, the Glock 19, Glock 17 is going to be more shootable, allowing you to get more hits on target than a Glock 26 in the same given amount of time. I understand that when I carry a Glock 26. So that's an easy, obvious answer. Whatever gun you like, get it with 10-round magazines. If you like a SIG 226, get a 10-round magazine for a SIG 226. If you like a Beretta 92, get a 10-round magazine for a Beretta 92. It's still a good gun. Kind of the issue and the thing I don't like about that, I'll be honest, is as far as I'm aware in most of these places, you can't just take a regular standard magazine that the gun was engineered and designed and tested with and load it to 10 rounds. You have to get a different aftermarket magazine, or even just say a different than the normal magazine. Some of these do have factory options or are factory 10-round magazines, but they're not the original magazines the gun was designed with, that all the engineering and everything went into. So you're introducing potential problems with engineering. I don't like that. But it is what it is. A good gun is still a good gun if you only load 10 rounds in it. But you do get to this interesting tipping point because of the restrictions placed on these jurisdictions. Wherein some would say, like, who would carry a 45? Who would carry a 1911 45 ACP with, I know the standard, but there's a lot of fleshlight 8-round magazines. So let's say 9 rounds when you could carry a 17 plus 1 Glock 19. I'd say that's a good point, and that's why most people do that. Let's say your choice is between 11 rounds of 9mm 10 plus 1 or 9 rounds of 45. That line becomes a little less clear. I'd say a lot less clear. And I'll say that in most circumstances, the 9mm is the best choice. But in a full-size fighting handgun like a 1911, the 45 is not prohibitively harsh in recoil. Is a bigger bullet. It does have more power. You can't deny that. There have been a lot of advancements making 9mm kind of the go-to defensive rounds. But a lot of those advancements were geared towards law enforcement officers or military or whatever have full capacity. One of the reasons we gravitated to the 9mm is because you could get 17 plus 1 rounds as opposed to 8. But if that is taken away and it's 11 versus 8 or 9, that kind of skews that line quite a bit into some of these bigger calibers. And if you can only have a few rounds, do you want those rounds to be beefier? How about 45 ACP? How about 357 SIG? I'm not, nor have I ever been, a fan of 40 caliber once I started to understand ballistics and shoot quite a bit. And I still wouldn't choose it for this, but maybe 45 and maybe 357 SIG. Or what about, into the king of fairly common, if we can call it that, defensive handgun rounds, a 10 millimeter. A Delta Elite-ish gun, if not a Delta Elite itself. A 10 round, 10 millimeter, 1911. That is a lot of firepower. That is nothing to be ashamed of carrying. That is a fine carry piece. Kind of skews those lines if you put those restrictions on it. What about a revolver? Now, a lot of revolvers are going 6 rounds. It's called a 6-shooter for a reason, but that's not always the case. It's not uncommon to find a standard frame size 7-shot or even 8-shot 357 Magnum. 357 Magnum is known, I believe, in defensive situations is still, like full power 357, better. It is the best defensive as far as power goes round for round, stopping round for a handgun. I know this is going to be controversial, but I'll say for human defensive targets, even better than 10 millimeter. Good hot-loaded 357 Magnum round for round is good, is a good, as far as handguns go, stopping round for a handgun. So if you're restricted to, 10 rounds max, 7 rounds of 357 is not a bad choice at all. You give up those extra 3 rounds, you're not giving up, an extra 10 rounds, you're giving up a few rounds. Is it worth it for that greater lethality? And at least as far as I know, California still requires new semi-autos to be on some kind of approved roster list, and revolvers are exempt from that. It's another advantage, at least in that jurisdiction. So, in summation of those points, I would say, don't go with a smaller handgun just because you can only have fewer rounds. A bigger handgun in general is still going to be easier to shoot and better to shoot. But it may be worth stepping up in caliber. As much as I like 9mm, it still might be the choice for you, but the lines get quite blurry. You take 10 rounds of 10mm over 10 rounds of 9mm and a full-size fighting handgun. Do your own research, do your own testing on that. But it does present more of a sensible, viable option with more advantages than would be presented to somebody in a non-restricted state. So look into it if that appeals to you. Now let's talk about long guns. This is easy for me, because if you listen for any amount of time, you know that my go-to apocalypse zombie chipmunks or zombie moose. I say that kind of lightheartedly for the patrons. Patrons got a special zombie apocalypse guns episode, and they'll kind of understand those references. Anyway, for a chocolate and peanut butter has hit the fan kind of actual scenario, my go-to gun is a shotgun. It is a 12-gauge shotgun. It is generally my Benelli M2. It's kind of battling it out right now between the Benelli M2 and the Mossberg 590S that can shoot the short shells. But as far as I know, for a traditional tube-fed shotgun that's not a detachable box magazine, I don't know of anywhere that has restrictions on those. It's still the best gun. It would be the best gun for me in any state as a go-to, my only one gun that I can have. I can, much as that was a joke in the zombie episode, I can shoot a chipmunk with it, but I can also take out a grizzly bear with it. It is what a lot of guides use in Alaska for big brown bear. I can take a dove on the wing, and take a goose or a turkey. I can take out a bear, and it is, for, common small arms, the best stopping power round of any gun. And I won't get too far down this rabbit hole. When I was a cop and some more specialized assignments, I had, full auto weapons and machine guns and actual assault rifles that are full auto. Oftentimes, when it came to clearing a house of dangerous things, I would take a 870 with buckshot because it's the best tool for the job. I didn't care what looked coolest on Instagram. I cared what was going to work and get me breathing through that house. I walk with God and carry a big stick. The best tool for staying alive, feeding yourself, defense in most common defensive distances is a 12-gauge shotgun. And that's the good news for you if you're in a restrictive state. Lamenting over the fact that you can't have an AR-15. Use that ignorance to your advantage. What is that quote from the Count of Monte Cristo, let neglect become your ally. The shotgun is an often neglected tool, especially in the tactical, super cool looking guns that are so popular. The shotgun is almost always the most effective tool for home defense, for most common defensive uses, for putting food on the table. So don't cry about the fact you live in a restrictive state. Get a good quality shotgun. They're awesome tools, and as far as I know, no state restricts them. So that's a win for you. Let's say you want a rifle with quite a bit of repeatable firepower. Now I know that there are all kinds of Franken ARs for different jurisdictions. Some can't have muzzle brakes, some can't have pistol grips, some can't have, I don't know, detachable magazines. I'm not going to talk about those because they're so specific to different jurisdictions, and I'm not going to get into all that. But let's say you want a rifle with a reasonable rate of fire for defensive and putting food on the table use, dual survival, dual defensive use gun, and putting food on the table. Well, you got lots of good options there. Probably the most quickly repeatable rate of fire besides semi-auto is going to be slide action, or most people call them pumps. A lot of people are familiar with pump shotguns, but pump rifles are a thing too, and they're a thing in full-powered rifle cartridges. Some people think, a 223 5.56 is a high-powered rifle cartridge. Compare that to a 308 or a 30-06. And the good news is they made those for a long time, the Remington 760. And they made them with detachable box magazines. And in a lot of places, I believe, since it's not a semi-auto, it's a manually operated, you can get around a lot of those restrictions. And it's a good rifle with a lot of firepower. And another big bonus is, in those jurisdictions or in a lot of other jurisdictions, it doesn't look tactical. It looks like a classic American hunting rifle. And they are deadly. I believe they are called the Game Master. Especially if you like 870 shotguns, look at a Remington 760. It's a good option. They make them, they made them, I believe, before Remington went bankrupt. 243, 30-06 is real popular, I believe. 280, which is maybe the best, well-balanced, all-around North American game cartridge. 270, I think maybe even a 35 Whelen if you want a thumper. Anyway, it's a good choice. Another real common good choice would be a lever action. Your traditional lever actions are going to have a tube magazine, much like the shotguns we talked about, and as I believe, is no restriction on magazine capacity because it's not detachable magazine. If I was going to go primarily for a dual-purpose gun in this, my number one choice would be a lever action 357, and if you know about 357, it'll also generally fire 38 specials, like the revolvers, assuming it feeds and the lifter and everything works properly with that size cartridge. You can safely fire 38 specials in them. So a good lever action, let's say a Marlin, I would go stainless steel, that fires 38 special 357. We talked about how effective the 357 is in a handgun. It only gets more effective, assuming you select the right ammo carefully, in a rifle. Is a good choice, especially, let's say, if you decided to go with a 357 Magnum revolver, 7-round, and you had a lever action 357 rifle. That's a good loadout. That's a good loadout for having in your truck. That's a good loadout for when the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan. They make the shot capsules for very small game. You can load really heavy, slow for caliber rounds for being super quiet that don't require a suppressor, because if you live in a place that won't let you carry 11 rounds in a mag, they're probably not going to let you have a suppressor. I could be wrong about that. You can totally legally, totally without any restriction, load very, very quiet. Quieter than, let's say, an AR is with a suppressor, I believe. Just lightly loaded, heavy for caliber 38 special rounds. And they're quiet. And they're deadly. There's a lot of utility in that kind of loadout. From hot 357s to really slow 38 specials for either super quiet or for small game hunting that won't blow your game apart like a 5.56 might. There's a lot of utility in that. In fact, if we're talking about total end-of-the-world scenario where I have to feed myself and defend myself, I might take that even in an unrestricted place over an AR. AR is a great battlefield implement. It is arguably the best we have today, at least of any kind of mass issue, but it is not the best for putting food on the table. People hunt deer with them, but deer were hunted almost to extinction, as I've heard it said. I don't know that firsthand because I wasn't alive then, during the Depression east of the Mississippi. And the population was a lot lower then than it is now. What about small game? Really want to shoot a dove with an AR-15, even if you can, assuming height overbore and you're just that good. What's going to be left to eat? Anyway, it's a good choice, so don't feel bad about it if you live in a restricted state, or if you live in an unrestricted state, it's a good choice. 357 Magnum lever action. Marlin would probably be my first choice. There are other companies that make them, the Rossies and the classic Winchester. Listed Rossi first because as far as I know, Winchester never made one in stainless. I'm big on stainless. I hunt hard. And Rossi did make them in stainless, and they're beautiful, light, handy little guns. Anyway, if you want the classic Winchester, wouldn't fault you for that. They are heirloom quality. You know, your grandkids ought to be proud to have one. Kind of guns. They are great. Imagine Henry makes one. But anyway, a very good choice. Is it as fast, a lever action, as a pump? I don't think they're as fast, but in practical terms, they are probably within spitting distance, as they colloquially say. What if you want a lever action? We just did an episode, go listen to this one, an entire episode on get to the point lever actions. Lever actions designed to fire full power rifle cartridges. Most fire traditional lever action calibers like 45-70, like 30-30, with the rounded bullets, because you're stacking them one behind each other and you don't want them to detonate in the magazine. There are some that have detachable magazines. Probably still legal because they're manually operated. You can fire full power rounds, a 308. You want to step up, that'd be the logical choice, but you also get it in 30-06. The BLR Browning lever action rifle even comes in 7 Rem mag, 300 Win mag. A lot of firepower. You know, let's say you're on the border in California and one of your jobs is to outride fences. Outriding fences on your quad, and you can't have, you know, a fully capable AR. Lever action with a good scope in that scenario in 308, in 243 if you want to get a little bit more intermediate with it, or in 30-06 if you just want to go old school. That is a good weapon. So there are options if you want full power lever actions. And there are options if you want to go semi-auto. And again, for a lot of these jurisdictions, I can't speak for all of them, but we talked about the Remington 760. Remington also made a semi-automatic version, the 740. One's called the Game Master and one's called the Game King. I forget which is which. But it doesn't have a lot of these things that are restricted in some places. It doesn't have a muzzle device unless one's custom put on there. It doesn't have a pistol grip stock. These are semi-automatic rifles in full rifle calibers, 308, 30-06, 270. Way more powerful than an AR, and in a lot of places aren't going to be restricted. Going to have as many rounds? No. You are giving up capacity. But think to yourself realistically, in any kind of bad scenario, defending yourself, putting food on the table, are there many problems you can't solve with, let's say, 5 or 6 rounds of 308 or 270? There might be a few you can think of, but probably not many. The vast majority, you can solve that problem with that. And these you can mount good quality optics on. I know some people may take exception to this that just love ARs, and I like ARs, and love hunting, and I love hunting, and love hunting with ARs. I don't check that box. I have done it. I've done it successfully. But the Remington 740, the Browning BAR, Browning automatic rifle, not the military machine gun, but their hunting automatic rifle, semi-automatic rifle, those are better tools for hunting than an AR. And hopefully you're going to have to feed yourself more than defend your life. If you are a hunter or somebody, a man that, if you want to be the kind of man that puts food on the table for his family, whatever comes, those are going to be better choices, in my opinion, than an AR. Now, if you want to go more military, that's still legal in most of these jurisdictions, I got really 2 choices for you. The SKS. The SKS was like the quintessential poor man's deer hunting rifle when I was growing up. They're a lot cheaper back then, but they're still a good choice today. They're a fine military rifle. Military grade, they're rugged, they're reliable. They're kind of ye olde prepper rifle from a couple of decades ago. They're still great rifles, the SKS. They fire the 7.62-39. It's a great round. I would encourage you not to try and turn it into an AK. Leave it the way that it is. Feed it with stripper clips, 10-round stripper clips. A good amount of firepower in an intermediate cartridge. If you just love America and want to go American, which I respect that, you just want more power like Tim the Toolman Taylor, you can always go with an M1 Garand. Nobody's going to argue with the firepower of an M1 Garand. Now, would I take that for most modern defensive scenarios over an AR? No, I wouldn't. Of course I wouldn't. We're talking about people that are restricted that cannot own a standard AR-15. Would I rather have 8 rounds of 30-06 where I can throw in another M-block clip quickly over an AR with 10 rounds of 223 where I can't take the magazine out of it? Yeah, I probably would take it over that in that scenario. So I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that restrict M1 Garands. In fact, I think even Canada, I forgot about you guys, Canada. You guys have restrictions too. I believe even Canada has an exemption that allows the M1 Garand. My advice, if you're looking for one of these to actually train with and shoot and ride around with in your truck, one without matching serial numbers, get one that's been a little beat up and shot quite a bit. Because if you train like I do, you're going to beat it up and shoot it quite a bit. And if it doesn't have matching serial numbers, you're probably going to get it for cheaper, and it could still be a good shooter. I don't want an all-matching serial number, highly coveted collector gun with no scratches if you're going to beat the crap out of it and scratch it. Maybe get one that's had the barrel replaced or the stock cut down for a smaller shooter back when these things weren't super expensive. You're probably going to want a shorter stock if you're shooting in a modern square to the target shooting stance anyway. But those are your two good choices, the SKS and the M1 Garand. Semi-automatics but not detachable box magazine, and I believe in general 10 rounds or less. So in a lot of these jurisdictions are a good choice. There are some jurisdictions that have even less restrictions. If you live in a place where an Mini 14 would be legal but an AR would not be, the Mini 14 is a fine rifle. I use them in police work, and oftentimes I like them better than an AR, even than my full auto. For a lot of things, they point well, they handle well, they shoot well. I'm humping through the brush and things like that. If you ever popped the magazine out of your gun when you were hiking with it, when it was in a sling, when it was on your back going through brush and stuff like that, know that sometimes you don't want a quick push button magazine change. Sometimes you like the rock and lock magazine, which this gun has. The Mini 14 with 10 round mags, it's a good gun. And that was ye olde tactical gun of the 80s. That was like what the cool kids had, the cool men had back in the 80s, back in Soldier of Fortune and things like that. It was in a lot of the Soldier of Fortune magazines. Maybe back then they trusted it more than the AR platform because it's basically a scaled down M14, which is kind of an adaptation of the M1 Garand that we talked about, a good, solid military weapon. And the Mini 14, although not as widely as the AR-15 M16 by any stretch, has seen a bit of actual use, especially in law enforcement. It's a good gun. So if you can have that and you can't have an AR-15, AR-15 that's been changed to be so ridiculous that you can't take out the magazine or something, you can have just a straight Mini 14 because it has a regular traditional hunting style stock and no flash suppressor or anything like that. You can mount good quality optics on there. If this is you, I would encourage you to really look at the Mini 30. If you're, again, in this situation, if you can only have 10 rounds, you might want to go with the 10 rounds of 7.62-39 over 223. But that's up to you. They're both good options, the Mini 14, the Mini 30. But again, if it's your one gun, think about if you really want that over a shotgun. That is, in my opinion, the most versatile, most practical. Although probably the gun I've trained with the least, the shotgun over the pistol and the rifle, especially for competition, it is the most practical gun. And staying alive and survival and being a modern Minuteman is not so much about looking cool on Instagram. It's about surviving and putting food on the table. And the shotgun does that well. And most places, as far as I'm aware, they're not restricted. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Gunfighter Life. I'm talking a lot about ways to support the podcast. I don't want these to turn into infomercials. If you want to support, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. If you want to contact me, I'd love to hear from you, assuming what you have to say is nice. Either way, if you want to contact me, goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, the tactical tip of the day. We talked a lot about guns, and this is Gunfighter Life, so I'm going to talk about dogs. It's way past playtime for my dog, so I think I'm going to take him down to the river and to go running after this, God willing. I have a Rhodesian Ridgeback named Alexander Hamilton, who last I weighed him was 110 pounds and still growing, not yet hit his birthday, and has treed 2 bears thus far. Anyway, tactical tip of the day. Soap, specifically dish soap. If you have something you don't want your dog to chew on, especially stuff when you're not around, because you should correct the behavior if you see it, rub it with dish soap. Let's say the leg of a chair. Rub dish soap on it. Not watered down dish soap, just straight like Dawn dish detergent. No, I'm not sponsored by Dawn. Rub it down. If the dog chews on it, it's a self-correcting problem. It's kind of like them chewing on a cactus. It will fix itself. If they go to chew on that chair leg and it's covered in dish soap, they will quickly find out they don't want to chew that thing. Do this pretty much with any shoe I can think of. Chair legs, desk corners, anything like that. It's a cheap, easy way. You probably already have dish soap. On a sponge, rub it on there and let it dry. And that way it's a self-correcting problem. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day coming at you from Psalm 3:5. I was reading this morning and I thought, you know what, that's probably going to be the tactical verse of the day. The 35th Psalm. Plead my cause, O Lord, with those who strive with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for my help. Also draw out the spear and stop those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let those be put to shame and brought to dishonor who seek after my life. Let those be turned back and brought to confusion who plot my hurt. And that's just the first part of the psalm. I'd encourage you to read your Bible. A good warrior is not just strong in body and skilled with weapons. He is strong in spirit and skilled and knowledgeable in the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, your offensive weapon against the evil spiritual forces. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.